Hi everyone. I do apologize for my last video where there is no audio. So we're going to talk about it here in the car while I'm waiting to pick my son up from school today. So we're going to talk about what Kienböck's disease is and how it affects piano players. So first of all, Kienböck's disease is a really rare bone condition that probably none of you have ever heard of. And that's okay. Kienböck's disease affects less than 0.5% of the population in the world today. And even fewer people know they have it. They say that roughly 60% of people are unaware that they have Kienböck's disease. Now, Kienböck's disease was discovered in the early 1900s by a gentleman whose last name was Kienböck in Austria. And what Kienböck discovered was that the lunate bone, which is a very small moon-shaped bone right here at the bottom carpal row of bones in your wrist, died. And he called it an avascular necrosis of the lunate. Avascular means that it's lost blood supply, and this can be caused by a variety of reasons. However, they don't really know how it begins or starts, and sometimes it can be attributed to accidents, and sometimes it can be contributed to a predisposition. So it's still kind of up in the air what really causes Kienböck's disease. Now, it's lost blood supply, and a necrosis means that the bone is dying or it is dead. So basically, people who have Kienböck's disease have a dying or dead wrist bone in their hand. Now, this lunate bone is the bone that moves your wrist back and forth. And this is a normal hand, right? This is my left hand, and it is completely normal. It rotates at almost exactly the correct amount of angle. This is my arm with Kienböck's disease, and as you can see, this is about as far back as I can actually tip my wrist. My fingers can actually push back a little bit, but I can't actually bend my wrist forward at all. So that's a comparison to each wrist. Now, when you have Kienböck's disease, you usually have to see an orthopedic surgeon, and you can have a variety of different treatments. The first treatment that doctors tend to usually do is to revascularize the lunate bone by rerouting veins and arteries to go through those bones. And what's typical with this is that you get a bone graft from either your radius or your ulna, and they core out the lunate, stuff in the bone graft so that the bone will regenerate, and move the artery or the veins in order to make your blood supply go directly through the bone. Now, I have had this surgery. In fact, it was my third treatment surgery, my fourth surgery overall. And when I had this surgery, I have a scar right here. When I had this surgery, they took the bone graft from my ulna. Now, most people with Kienböck's disease can live a fairly normal life, and most people discover that they have Kienböck's disease in their 20s to their 30s. However, I was predisposed to the condition because I have another rare genetic or congenital defect where you have your radius grow too long, and they call that a radius positive, meaning it grew further than it was supposed to, so it gained extra millimeters or extra micro inches or whatever, centimeters, whatever you want to call it. Now, when I had my first treatment surgery, what they did was called a joint leveling. Joint leveling is when they take your bone and they place a cut almost directly in half of your bone, and they shorten your bone by taking out a small chunk of bone, holding it together with a plate, usually made out of titanium, and screws. So my first surgery, and you can see part of my scar, let's see here, I can turn my wrist this way, right here. It goes all the way up my forearm to about right here. And what happens when you have this is a lot of pain. And what's really, really difficult is being in very volatile weather or being in colder conditions. because your body has a harder time adjusting to the metal in your arm, which is usually really close to the surface of your arm. Now, when I had this surgery done, I was living in Germany at the time. And in Germany, they don't believe in using a lot of medications or narcotics. And often you just go to surgery in plain clothes, and they don't really give you a whole lot after that. And I remember being in the hospital and having excruciating pain and moaning throughout the night, and my roommate had to call the nurse, and they had to give me some morphine to handle the pain. It is very, very serious pain. It is awful to deal with. So that's a joint leveling. Now, what happened in my situation was also unfortunate. I had, at the time that they removed the bar and the screws, I had my radius too short. So instead of cupping the bottom carpal row of bones, my radius and ulna were like almost straight edge. And that's not really how the bones in your hand are supposed to be. So what ended up happening was, for my third treatment surgery, we did an ulna joint, an ulna joint leveling. It took me a second there. An ulna joint leveling. So that's your outer arm bone, the shorter one. And so again, they took out a couple millimeters of bone length. And this time they put in only 6 screws and a titanium plate. Now, I had this in for a couple of years. I believe it was something like 3 years. And then when I went to have it removed, because it was causing a lot of pain, like poking through my skin, that kind of stuff, they actually ended up noticing that the bone had calcified over the titanium plate and screws. And so when they removed them from my arm, they ended up re-breaking my arm. So yeah, that was fun. Now, most people who have Kienböck's disease are in one of 4 stages. Stage 1 is when things are questionable. You've had an injury and things are looking odd in your x-rays or in your MRIs. Stage 2 is usually when they notice a fracture. Stage 3 is when your bone is starting to lose blood supply and starting to collapse. And then stage 4 is a fully collapsed bone. And usually if you're in stage 1 or 2, you can be successfully treated. When you're in stage 3 or 4, there is no treatment. There is no cure to Kienböck's disease. When I had my Kienböck's disease discovered, it was in what's called stage 3A, which is when my bone was losing blood supply and starting to break apart and crumble. When they did the surgeries, it actually stopped the bone from disintegrating any further, which is great. Now, usually after you have surgeries with Kienböck's disease, you do a lot of hand therapy, occupational therapy. You wear hard cast braces when you're sleeping or when you need to immobilize your arm or your wrist or your hand. And you wear a soft cast, usually with a metal bar that runs from your palm to your forearm when you're doing other types of activities or when you need compression or just light support. Now, another thing about Kienböck's disease is I've actually never met anybody else with Kienböck's disease, but there are other alternative surgeries if you are in the later stages of the disease. There were 2 that became very popular around the time that I was being treated with my first treatment surgery in Germany. And they originated in the UK. And one of them was creating a prosthetic, taking out the lunate bone and inserting a prosthetic. I don't remember what it exactly was made of, but that over the course of time, I think it was around a decade, it proved not to be successful and really just ineffective. The second was creating a prosthetic by removing a tendon, rolling it up and kind of shaping it a little bit and inserting that into the space where your lunate is supposed to be. That also proved to be ineffective. There is another treatment surgery that is a little more common worldwide, which is when they remove the full bottom row of carpal bones and let the remaining 2 rows kind of settle. Now, this is really destabilizing to your hand and wrist, and I don't recommend even thinking about it unless your doctor is, really, I guess, impressed upon with some success, because it can alleviate the later stage symptoms of severe arthritis. So the bones don't rub up against each other. They've kind of resettled. The problem with this, of course, is when you reach the latest stage, stage 4 of Kienböck's disease, it's harder to create a bone plate in your hand. So I'm at the latest stage in my disease. I am 40 years old this March, and they are going to be doing a fusion sometime soon. I need to call my orthopedic hand surgeon and make an appointment first to get checked out, and then to kind of discuss where to go and when to do it. But fusion is a last resort, and it's permanent. And I don't recommend that anybody even consider it unless they cannot handle the amount of pain. They cannot handle the limitations that just being in your normal state with a normal lunate bone in there. Because once they fuse, they're going to take out the lunate and they're going to attach all of the little hand bones together. And this is going to alleviate symptoms of arthritis and growth of arthritis, of course. And that's Kienböck's disease. So how does it affect a pianist? This is a great question. Piano players are at an extreme disadvantage because we use our wrist a lot as a player. What's happened to me is, in my experience, it has actually shortened my finger span. So now I can barely comfortably reach an octave with my right hand. So it really limited how far I can spread out. Now, I already have normally small hands, and I could reach a ninth pretty okay before Kienböck's disease. And now it's questionable. Like, I can do it if I'm on one black key and one white key. But if I'm on two white keys, there's probably not a chance that I can do it. So it really limits your finger span, your hand span. It also crucially limits the motions that you can make with your hand and your arm. It limits how you can demonstrate to others to play properly, for example, with rounded hands. And, like correct choreographed type movements, for example, doing arpeggios, tuck unders, crossovers for scales can all be affected as well. The thing that's not affected is arm power. So you actually gain some arm strength up here. So when you're using your arm weight to play things like chords, it actually isn't too bad. It also really, really limits your capacity when you sit and play the piano for attention span, because you start paying attention to the pain or to what's bugging you. It also really diminishes your energy levels. So you might have been able to sit at the piano for 2 hours to practice and play and work. And maybe after Kienböck's disease, you can barely tolerate 10 minutes. And this is unfortunate. And it's a very, very real side effect. And it is very, very depressing, I do have to say. There have been a few years that I've gone through major bouts of depression where I couldn't even get dressed without the help of my husband. I had difficulty going to the bathroom. I had difficulty showering, bathing, shaving. I had difficulty putting in my contacts. I had to learn how to do contacts with my left hand. I had to, for a time, learn how to kind of chicken scratch with my left hand. Once my fingers were able to move, I had to kind of learn how to write with just these two fingers because these three were not moving very well. You also get a lot of loss of feeling in your fingers. I had some pretty significant nerve damage from my first surgery. And I actually couldn't feel my thumb for something like 4 or 5 months after the surgery, which isn't normal. So you should be able to feel your fingers within a few weeks after the surgery. So those are some things that kind of happen with Kienböck's disease. And I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that this is kind of a good replacement for the video I did previously. And I want to thank you all so much. If you're not subscribed, please hit subscribe. I'd love to have you come to my channel and hear all of these great pieces of music that I perform for my students, so they have a good resource of music to listen to. And also just to hear the fun things that I'm doing to get recommendations for books and materials and all that jazz. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.